see what's happening. Remeis, kan you show me the hallo.
Microfoon ek by die deur asseblief.
Maar ek het nog net wat ek van die mikrofoon geword, maar baie dankie. Dankie man.
Okay, I'll follow now from just to make sure everything's fine.
Okay.
I'm sure everything's alright.
Jump in if there's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, it says it's live now.
Okay. Okay,
Follow
cool.
from my phone.
All right.
So yeah, it's just double check. That's running. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ik ga die microfoon verkeerd doen.
Gaan dit aan die eerste kant? Wat het gebeur?
Net so lank so aan.
Wat net so. En ek gaan my gou wys van hierdie. Ja. Ja, nee, dis okay. Ja, is baie. Okay. So daai gebruik ek dan hierdie een.
Ja.
Nee, hierdie een nie.
Je kan altijd.
Moet ek al twee gebruik?
Nou, ja.
Okay.
Zal je helpen nou?
Goed gehou. Okay, so daai bietjie minder maak dink ek.
Ja.
Of daar spier doen. Okay. So.
Ja. Is er maar eigenlijk weer een actie?
Wat hierdie een?
Ja, goed.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Is hy in?
Ja.
Okay. Goed, en dan daai?
Nou, dat is
O, hy is. Nou laat is dit. Wat ek moet oopmaak.
Dat is zo die documentkamera.
Okay, so dan kan ek as ek tussen hulle wil.
Dan kan je het minimaal zo foto maken.
Okay.
Ze kan niet zo dat ik goed.
Okay.
Ja, maar nou.
Nee. Good morning. Oh my goodness. We're trying to sort out the live streaming as well. This is really, would it do the echo thing? Is it okay? Because otherwise they can't hear me. Those of you, were there anybody in live streaming in the class last week that frustrated you? Because you couldn't see, you couldn't hear. No one. Okay, so welcome to the guys at home. So in order to get that right, we're just setting up the document camera so that when I show you, they can see as well. That's the whole thing. If you weren't here last week and you didn't get a copy of this, you can come to the front and quickly collect one. I'll leave one this side and one this side. Ek weet nie, is dit alright vir hulle? Hoe klink dit vir jou?
Dank alright.
Ek moet maar net daaroor kom.
Nee, dis nou 'n bietjie erg, soos die weergalm.
Die weergalm.
Ek het
Okay.
hoor nie.
Ja, ja. Nee, dis goed. Okay, so hoe maak ons? Dink jy ek moet dit sagter sit? Sal hy nog hier op wees? Hallo. Okay, kom ons hoor gou. Where's the student that comes? Kan jy gou vir my luister? Kan julle nog hoor? Oor die mikrofoon, oor die speakers? Nee. Nie oor die speaker nie, maar Dit klink tog so. Someone at the back of the class. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me over the speaker? Is the echo less? The echo is less. Echo is less. Yeah, I think that's better. Is dit beter? Okay. So it's oor die speaker, maar is nie die weergalm nie. Dankie. I think that's better. All right. Still searching. All right. Okay, the story is, let's just get up to speed for everybody. If you look at what we did last week, so if you remember that we talked about the impact of a tariff, basically we're back in chapter 5. Ek het dit baie, is dit nog nie beter nie, is dit te erg? Te erg. Echo is a lot, Remai. Okay, in your textbooks, chapter 5, exhibit or figure, I think they call it figure 5, is it 566? Which one was it? 5, oh my goodness. So while we're setting up, let's go there. Yes, 560, no, 5. $5.16 and $5.17. $5.16 and $5.17. Come, shh. Listen up quickly. Let's get on this page. So we looked at trade. Trade is important for countries. And when countries are free to trade, they can get the advantages. So they can look at their comparative advantage and see what would be best for them to produce. If they produce that, and they produce that well, they can export the rest, the abundance that they produce, and that can go to other countries. Then they can buy with the money they receive other products. So what this, and this I didn't say last week. What trade enables countries to do, write this down somewhere. What trade enables countries to do is that whereas they need to produce on their production possibility frontier, you remember that they have to produce on it. They can't produce off it because that's impossible. So they produce on their PPF, but international trade enables them to consume more than that. They can consume off their PPF, more than the production possibility frontier, more than the amount of or the quantity of goods and services that they could produce given their own resources. You're hearing what I'm saying? Because the consumption can be your own goods plus those that you now import from other countries. Okay, so consumption is increased. What is consumption? Consumption is using goods and services to satisfy wants and needs, and that leads to higher standards of living. So that within the country, the citizens can now consume more than they would have if we did not have trade. That enables us for more production in future and more consumption and economic growth. Okay, you with me? Now, where we are at with the, are we ready here? Okay, let me just see how we do this. Vision is dit daar ene. Okay. So jy moet maar volgende week weer nou uit. Okay. Okay, so ek kan al tap tussen hulle. Okay, so as ek as daai ene nou oop is, ons gaan daai so en ek gaan al tap, dan gaan ek hom daar kry. Okay, cool. Baie dankie. Dit maak 'n groot verskil. All right. Okay, so then the question is, free trade seems to be great, but for reasons, countries decide to have what they call trade restrictions. One of the trade restrictions is for them to levy a tax. If they levy a tax on imports of goods, we call it a tariff. So what we've been doing is to see, is to see what is happening to the economy. What are the impacts of such a trade restriction? Okay, so this is where we're at. You with me? Right. So what we did is we worked through this and saying if there's, let's say, on imported motorcycles, there is a tariff. What will happen if we move from a position of free trade to this? Okay, so then we moved through the story and we answered that. We said consumer surplus will decrease, producer surplus will increase. We looked at producer surplus and consumer surplus. And then we say, okay, what happens to consumer surplus? We saw that will decrease. Producer surplus, we saw that would decrease. And then what else happens? And in figure 517, that is the graph that you actually need to use. Okay, so that is what we've been drawing. So then you drew the graph on that page. So those of you who haven't done so, I would encourage you to quickly draw a demand and supply curve like the one on the just demand and supply, like that one. Quickly ask your group members to help you figure it out, and then I want you to answer that page. We got more or less to number 6, but we haven't talked about number 7. So quickly revise what we've been doing by doing the worksheet, especially that last page, the impact of a tariff, and then I'll give you 3 minutes to quickly catch up, draw at least the demand and supply, the world price, the PW, and the PW plus T. So that you end up with something like this, where you have your world price, that is the price initially, before tariff, then the tariff is added, PW plus T, and then these blocks show what happened to consumer surplus and producer surplus. In your textbook, 517. And then fill in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What is that? On your worksheet, you'll see that it's 1, what happened to consumer surplus. How did it decrease? 2, what happened to producer surplus? How did that increase? 3, what's been happening to the price? What has happened to the quantity? 4, what has happened to, yeah, that's a quantity. 5, what happened to imports? 6, what happened to government income? And 7, we need to see what is the net effect. Imports. IM is imports. Okay, let's talk it quick. If you're drawing it, draw with me. If you've drawn it already, quickly check. Let's just quickly talk through it. Okay, tomorrow in the lab is our class test day. So I will include a question, something like this. Okay, you don't have to draw it, but in order to identify what's happening. Okay, so focus with me. Let's go step by step. Okay. We have the market for the domestic market. This is the South African market for motorcycles. With me. Before we have any tariff, come focus quickly with me. Everybody, you want to listen. Before we start, we look at our demand and supply, and we know that the domestic equilibrium would have been where demand and supply meet if we did not have trade with the rest of the world. Now we have trade with the rest of the world, which means we can buy motorcycles in South Africa at the world price, at the best price. With me. Now, what is the world price? The world price is given, let's say, at that level. That is where PW comes from. It says that is the world price. Now, we can put a figure in. We can say, let's say these are motorcycles in the 100,000 Rand range, or it could be less. It depends on where you're pitching it. Right, so you can put a price there. So at that price, what happens? The quantity demanded, and if you look at your textbook, that would be Q5, if I remember correctly, would be Q5. Why did, oh, 5, that's right. That's the number of motorcycles consumers would purchase if we can import at the, so if there's no restriction of imports, we can access motorcycles at that price. Right, you with me? In the domestic market, what is the signal for the producers? The producers say, no, that price is way too low for us to produce much. Our cost, remember the cost, the marginal cost line that you did with Mr. Burrows, is saying how much we can produce at this world price, and they only produce Q1. Right. So in the domestic market, we would have a shortage at that price. You with me? Q5 is more than Q1. But we can import, and that's the main thing. So the first thing we know is that, all right, thank you very much, we can import the difference between Q1 and Q5. That's the imports in the absence of tariffs. Consumers win big time. You with me? Right. Why do they win? Because they have consumer surplus that is quite large. The consumer surplus, we said, will be, in this case, the area above the price and below the demand curve. That is consumer surplus. Okay? Which is great for the consumers. How about the producers? Do they have surplus? Those producers whose costs are along in the line of the world price, they will say, yeah, great, they have surplus too. So their producer surplus will be below price, that triangle, and above the supply curve. That is the producer surplus for the producers. Okay, this is before trade. This is with trade, before tariff. No restrictions. Now government, for some reason, maybe these guys, the producers, say, this is unfair. We need protection. we can't compete with these exuberant low prices from the foreign countries' producers. Please give us a tariff. So they lobby, and that's normally what happens. And the government says, great, let's put a tariff because maybe we can earn some money from it. So they add a tariff to the world price. That means for each unit that is imported, there will be a tariff. And let's say that increases, that goes there. So that is the tariff, the size of the tariff. That would be the amount. So if this was 100 and that is 110, then the tariff is 10,000 or whatever the unit is per unit. So that's where we get the world price plus the tariff. That is where that comes from. Now what happens to quantity demanded and quantity supplied? Can you show that? You see how you build it. Now you think. Higher prices, what do we know will happen? At higher prices, the quantity demanded will decrease. That decreases to Q4. And the quantity supplied will increase to Q2. What happens to imports? More motorcycles are being manufactured in the country. That's why the QS increases from Q1 to Q2. And less motorcycles are demanded because the price is now higher. Okay, so that means we need to import less. So imports will drop to the area to that extent Q2, Q4. That's imports too. You following? Everybody with me? Right. Now what happens in terms of, now we have to access it. So now I'm actually at this point asking what will happen to each one of those questions that we posed. All right, I want to know what happens to consumer surplus, what happens to producer surplus, what happens to the price, what happens to the quantity, what happens to the government, what happens to, what's 6, imports and exports somewhere, and 7, what is the overall effect? Okay, so now I assess it. So 1, what happens to consumer surplus? Where's consumer surplus now? Consumer surplus moves to the area above the new price, the orange there, and below the demand curve. So that is CS2. Producer surplus increases to the area below the price, above the supply curve, and that would be producer surplus 2. So what happened to consumer surplus? It moved from the yellow to the orange. You with me? So that means if I need to, let me color everything that we lose, the consumers lose that. So basically, I'm just going to draw it. I'll show you now how you show it on the other graph. That area is the decrease in consumer surplus. Can you see that? That yellow blocks there. Everybody with me? All right? What happens to producer surplus? Producer surplus increases. So if I color that now, that section looking like that with some yellow in the background is the increase in producer surplus. With me? What happened to the price? That's what number 3 asks. What happened to the price? The price increased from PW to PT. So there is an increase in the price to PW plus T. That's the new price. What happened to the quantity? 2 things. So you need to say 2 things happened. Quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Quantity demanded dropped. Quantity supplied increased. Am I right? Okay. What happened to imports? Imports are now, and this is important to see, that section. So that section between Q2 and Q4, that is imports. So imports actually dropped to imports 2. And what did we ended with this last week? We said, what happened to government? What happens to government? They get the amount of the tariff as income. It's a tax for each one of the units that are imported. Okay, all the units that are imported. You with me? So where is that? The amount of the tariff is the difference between PW and T. That's that tariff. So that is that height. Okay, that would be per unit, the amount of the tariff. Let's say that was 100, that was 110, then that would be 10. And how much, what is the value of the revenue they get? We need to times it with the quantity imported, right? That's Q2, Q4. If that was 200, that's 400. This would be 200. You with me? And if I multiplied that, that box is what the government revenue will be. So government revenue equal to that increases. So now what actually happened was that this yellow decrease in consumer surplus, that section went to the producers. That's number 2. That section goes to the government. That's number 6. So tell me, number 7, what is the net effect on the economy? Is it a better or worse for the economy? Better. Why? Okay, the government gets more money. That's a good thing. Producers get a little bit more producer surplus. That's probably a good thing. But what about the consumers? The consumers loses, or they lose all the time. So in the final instance, that yellow bit is a chunk goes to producers, a chunk goes to government. But what about those yellow blocks? That is the problem. That is depending on how large they can be, that is sometimes really a big issue. So those triangles, that one and that one, is what we call a dead weight loss or a welfare loss to society. A dead weight loss or a welfare loss to society. Right. So in terms of that graph I showed you initially, if you now look at this one, okay, just focus on what's happening on this slide. If you need to now answer that, and typically I can't give you crayons and stuff in the computer lab or even in the test, so I would ask you something like this. Number one, according to this graph, we look at our imports, the same thing, just our Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 is different. What is the loss in consumer surplus? Number one, what would you say? If you have to interpret that graph, say what is the loss to consumers in consumer surplus? What would that be? Let me take this one away. How would you say? Consumer surplus was area 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 initially. Can you see that? Now it shrinks to area 1 plus 2. So in number one, what is the loss in consumer surplus? That would be 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. Am I right? Okay. So you can see all those boxes. What is the gain in producer surplus? Producer surplus was 7. Now it's 7 plus 3. So the gain in producer surplus would be box 3. So part of the consumer surplus is transformed, given away, redistributed to the producers. Okay, sorry consumers, we're taking some of it and giving to the producers because we value them more than we value you. Because you don't have a voice, the producers do have a voice. That's often what happens. All right, everybody with me? What happens to price? Price increases from PW to PW plus T. What happens to quantity? Quantity demanded with the tariff will change from Q2 to Q4. Quantity supplied will change from Q1 to Q3. With me? Imports. Imports decreases from Q1, Q2 to Q3, Q4. What happens to the government? Government gains. Number 5. Thankfully, somebody gets it. So, sorry, consumers, you don't get number 5, but we give it to the government. They get number 5. So, box 5 for the government. What is the net effect in this economy? A welfare loss or a deadweight loss of 4 plus 6. Those two triangles combined. Okay, the moral of the story. Any trade restriction like this, and the same is true for quotas, the same is true for subsidies, has this effect on the economy. The community loses out. So although individual groups like producers and the government will gain more, the consumers will lose. So it becomes less efficient, a less efficient distribution of resources. There are sometimes reasons to still do it, but the cost must be known. There will be a cost, and the cost is, you can calculate that by using the demand and supply information for that industry. Like chicken. I don't know if you've sort of followed chicken, the price of chicken. Price of chicken was always really cheap in South Africa. If you want to braai, you want to have a barbecue, you want to make a stew, chicken is your answer. It's cheap. Everybody could afford it. Not any longer. And if you go back in history 2 years ago, there was a huge reintroduction of tariffs on chicken. What did it do? It pushed the prices of chicken up. And now we all the consumers need to pay higher prices for chicken. So chicken is no longer a cheap meat substitute, which has many implications for the community at large. So these things work through. You can calculate the cost. Say again. We import a lot of chicken, yes, but now the argument is, let's put up a tariff. then the producers will be able to produce more chicken, and then the prices of chicken domestically will fall. Does it ever fall? No. The producers just produce at those higher prices. So that's part of the story. All right. Any questions about this? Will you be able to do a question like this in the test? And if I ask you boxes like that in tomorrow's class test, you'll be able to do that. Any questions on that? The class test will just be on what we've done so far, and then I'll give you some questions that you need to look for in the lab, but I'll tell you exactly what to do in terms of trade stuff. So if you know this, you should be fine, and then in class you'll hear all the other answers. Okay, so you should actually get 100% in your class test if you follow step by step. Right. Cool. Other measures, I quickly want to say something about the portfolio. I'll show you now. Other measures are having quotas, which are quantitative restrictions. So what are those? You'll see that in your textbook. Instead of saying there's a tax, they say, no, you're only allowed to import 5 motorcycles a month. So instead of putting a tax on, you just put a number restriction on. That has the same impact graphically like the tariff. Then the same like subsidies. Government subsidizes the industry. This is big news in the negotiations in terms of the WTO, World Trade Organization, because of the developed countries having subsidies on their what? Those of you that the developed countries put a lot of subsidies on what kind of products that they produce. Who knows? The agricultural products, milk and other agricultural products, in order to protect their domestic industries. And the developing countries say, but this is what we do. Well, we need to export these things, and we can export it much cheaper than you can produce it. You should not be producing these things. But they want to protect the industry. So this is still happening. Then other non-tariff barriers, like making it hard in terms of rules and regulations and all those types of things, make it very hard to come in. Visa requirements, South Africa knows about that, for foreigners coming in. Those are all things to protect and not have free trade. Exchange controls, this goes to the finance. We'll talk about that when we now do 16.4, and exchange rate policy. Exchange controls, you may not take the currency out of the country, for instance. That would be exchange controls. All right, but we'll talk about that later. I want to conclude this section. It's not in the textbook, but just so that you know, South Africa plays a very important role in Southern Africa. Many of you know about these two organizations that we belong to, that we're part of. SACU, South African Customs Union, and SADC, the South African Development Community, SADC. SACU is small, SADC is bigger. I'll show you the maps quickly. That is SACU. So included there, you see the countries included. That means customs union. So we have similar tariffs to the rest of the world. So customs means that the tariff rules are the same, and we're supposed to not have any tariffs between each other. Supposed to. Then SADC is a development community that includes more countries, and we have common goals. And some people say, yeah, we need to try to be like the EU and have a common currency eventually, and so on. So there's been talks about that, but we're not very far on that road yet. Okay, they would have wanted it by 2015, but that didn't materialize because it's hard in terms of policy and differences in countries and so on. And then we also have in Africa COMESA, but South Africa and SACU is actually not part of it. And then we're also part of AGOA, which includes most of Africa. Okay, so those are the blocks in Africa that South Africa are part of. We have bilateral agreements with many other countries. We also belong, like you know, to the BRICS group of developing countries, emerging market economies, and so on. So that's basically all you need to know for economic sake. There's a lot more, but for 288, this is just this. Right, yes. I'm not sure. I think it's, it looks like the ones where we have some issues. You know, like if you see Zimbabwe and Somalia and so on, you know, I don't know, this is quite a few years ago, so I don't know what the reason for that was. Can't remember. Right, so if we go. Okay, in terms of the portfolio, I just want to say a few words quickly. I got some questions, email questions, and I know you're all busy with this. So I just thought actually sort of a FAQ type thing to show you how I answered it, because you might not have asked. And then in the one, just try maybe quickly to see whether we can answer the exchange rate situation, because a very good question. We're going to get there, but I thought let me try to quickly do some of the theory in regards to this. So someone asks, can you just choose any event from the trade and finance scene? Are there certain things that we should look at specifically? And also, do we do each part of the assignment each week, like all the sections? So we'll end up having 4 examples of each part of the assignment. So my answer was that you can choose anything. And then because in questions she asked about the first week, I said that you would probably have chosen something about the Federal Reserve interest rate. So that decision would have been one of your events with your articles substantiating that. And possibly the news about the South African balance of payments that came out, that was the first week in terms of the trade account and the current account situation that changed. Whenever there's change, and tells us something about the economy. How we interpret that will continue now. Then the answer on each part of the assignment is, I'll put all of this on Sunlearn for you. You have to have 4 of the summaries. That's first part of the question. Keep up with the exchange rates daily, and link what has been happening in the news, your events, to the movement in the exchange rate if you can for the week. But ultimately, you will put all of those together for the analysis of the exchange rates in the end. Okay, so you're going to say over the period, this is what happened to the exchange rate. And then from your news per week, you're going to interpret that. Okay, you with me? Then the other 2 sections can be done once, not weekly. So the balance of payments, we only get balance of payments news every quarter. So it's fine. Once is good. Just short. This is what's been happening. As well as for the exchange rate policy, that doesn't change. That's what it is at the moment. Fantastic. Just evaluate that. Also very short. The reflection happens at the end. Also short. So the only things, number 1 and 2, is what you keep on doing. Okay, you with me? Does that answer that? Okay, then another question. Now we're getting to the analysis. And you might feel exactly the same. I thought it was quite cool. I'm really struggling with the economics assignment. Let me try to do this. I really struggle with the... anyway. Now the microphone is not going to work. Now we're back to echo. Oh my goodness. If I speak very softly, does it help? No. If I don't speak at all, shall I switch it off?